Do you know the baseball team that has the largest number of runs in a single game? I'll bet you don't. Or how about the player with the most stolen bases in a season? Probably not who you think it is. Or how about the baseball team that went 2 seasons in a row without losing a single game? For answers to these and many more, stay tuned for this week's episode, which came from the Strange As It Seems archives and this fascinating folder called Old Baseball. Welcome back. This is Jeff Hix, curator of the Strange As It Seems archives and grandnephew of John Hix, who created Strange As It Seems back in the late 1920s. For this week's episode, we're going to dive into this old folder I found in the Hix Family Archives called Old Baseball. Strange and unusual stories, and keep in mind, this is old baseball in a folder compiled in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s from the Strange As It Seems archive. So we're going way back here, back to the beginning of baseball in the 19th century. So one of the first ones that I found in this folder, and first off in the archives from 1930 and 1931, a couple of amazing teams from the old days of baseball. The old Cincinnati Reds, known as the Red Stockings, of course, in the old days before nicknamed the Reds. They went through an entire season in 1869, 81 games with only 9 players without a single defeat, which was pretty incredible, except when you go back even further to the old Atlantic Baseball Club of Brooklyn, New York. This came out in 1931, and apparently they went 2 whole seasons without losing a single game. Probably set the record, at least it was back then and maybe still holds today, of the consecutive wins by a baseball team. Probably never be equaled again in history. Crazy. Old teams here, the old Atlantic Baseball Club and the old Cincinnati Reds from the 1860s. There were quite a few amazing facts in this folder. Not all of them look like they made it into a comic strip or not. And here was one that I found that kind of drew my attention. Apparently on May 11th, 1877, the Manchester and Harvard college teams played the most remarkable extra inning game on record. This is from Our National Game in the New York and Brooklyn Baseball Clubs by June Rankin 1888 Spalding Collection. But this was a game, apparently 24 innings without a run being completed when the game ended on account of darkness. Really interesting baseball player in this game, Jim Tyng. He was the Harvard catcher. Apparently he put out 36 men and assisted twice. I was trying to figure out, how do you assist in a catch or putting a player out? Made 2 guys catch it at once? Crazy. But this being the greatest number of putouts by any player in a single game, I wasn't able to verify that fact, and it never made it into a comic strip, which probably is why looks like my great uncle John Hix couldn't confirm it either, but did find a little bit another interesting fact about Jim Tyng. Even if he wasn't the record holder for putting out 36 men in a game, he was, however, the first man to wear a catcher's mask in baseball. Pretty amazing. I guess he took the actual inventor was Fred Thayer, his teammate who invented it. He took the concept off of a fencing mask, and Jim wore it, I guess, just the deflections from foul balls to take care of not, I guess there was so many injuries from fly balls that he was the first to wear one. So kind of an interesting baseball player, Jim Tyng. Fascinating. Here's another fact that actually did hold up. I did find this several times in other places now with the advent of the internet, but on September 4th, 1889, Manchester, New Hampshire, Portland played 6 games of baseball. Manchester, New Hampshire, and Portland, New Hampshire, those 2 teams played 6 games of baseball in one day, a sextuplet. 2 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. The last game, however, was forfeited by Manchester in the second inning as the players were too weary to carry on. Crazy. This was from Frank Menke, who is a compiler of popular sports annual information from Washington, D.C. in the Washington, D.C. Herald, August 4th, 1930. Crazy fact. And another famous baseball player from the old days, Harry Wright with the Cincinnati Reds, again, against the Holt Club. This is June 22nd, 1867 in Newport, Kentucky. Apparently made 7 home runs in a game. That's the largest number of home runs ever scored by an individual in a game. Harry Wright. So here's the answer to one of the questions at the top of the episode. What baseball player has the record for the most stolen bases in a season? And you'd be right in modern baseball rules if you chose Rickey Henderson in 1982, when I was about 17 years old. He stole 130 stolen bases. That record still holds today in modern baseball. But if you go back further into the 19th century, Harry Storey, who played for the Philadelphia team in 1888, across 130 games, he actually stole 156 bases in one season. But the trick question is, back in the 1880s, a player was often credited with a stolen base if they advanced an extra base on a fly ball or a wild pitch. So in modern baseball rules, Harry would have only stolen 87 bases. So technically, Rickey Henderson still holds the record, but if you go back into the old rules of the 1880s, that would be Harry Storey, strange as it seems. And how about the answer to the largest number of runs ever made in a game? It actually, as it holds today, it'd be 1922, the highest scoring in modern baseball history. Fascinating game. Well, what's that one? And another kind of trick question as well. What baseball team or teams scored the most runs in a baseball game? And you'd be right in the modern baseball era, or modern, I guess, considering over 100 years ago, 1922, when the Chicago Cubs beat the Philadelphia Phillies 26-23. That would have been the most runs scored in a game, which is 36. But if you go back even further, back to the crazy years of the 1880s, the largest number of runs ever made in a game, that was actually credited to the Niagara Club of Buffalo, New York. This is June 8th, 1869, when they defeated the Columbias of that city. You ready for this? 209-10. This is a 3-hour baseball game where 2 players apparently scored 25 runs each. Crazy. The least number of any runs scored by any Niagara batsman in that game was 20. They scored 40 runs in the first inning and 58 in another. Crazy. But again, older rules in an older time of baseball, but little known fact that the largest number of runs ever made by the Niagara Club of Buffalo, 1869. And another one from 1930, the longest baseball game ever played, or the longest one lasted. This has actually been surpassed since, but this was in 1930, the longest baseball game. Had lasted only 7 innings. It started at 10 o'clock in the morning, was called on account of darkness at 6 o'clock that evening. Crazy. Carrollton, Kentucky in 1868. However, since that point, longer games have been played. The longest game to date now was actually in 1981. The Pawtucket Red Sox and the Rochester Red Wings in the minor leagues played over 3 days, a game that went 33 innings. Crazy. That's apparently, in modern era, the longest baseball game ever played, strange as it seems. Here's another strange as it seems on baseball, but actually ice skating as well. We just did another episode last week on more amazing stories of ice skating, and here's one where a game of baseball was played on ice skates. This says 65 years ago. Of course, this was 1932, so this is in Cincinnati, Ohio. Game of baseball played on ice skates, strange as it seems. This is a great one. How about this? Charles Eldridge, captain of the St. Petersburg Cubs, KUBS in Florida. He is actually, at the time of this was 1932 as well. At the time, he was actually older than the game of baseball itself. This is the 3/4 century baseball club of St. Petersburg, Florida. It limits its membership to players who are over 75 years of age. The junior team includes players from 75 to 85, while the senior team begins at 85 and goes on apparently indefinitely. And Charles Eldridge, the captain, is more than 100 years old, older than the game of baseball itself. William Judd, mascot of the senior team, is 91 years old, and the average age of all members, 84. Crazy. The teams play a regular season each winter with 2 games a week scheduled, and crowds apparently up to 5,000 persons would come out to see the youngsters play. Crazy. Charles Eldridge, 100-year-old baseball player, and at the time, older than the game of baseball itself. Here's a last one here from John Hix. This is crazy, but baseball umpires apparently in 1859, they used to sit in rocking chairs behind the catcher. Crazy fact from 1859. A couple of amazing facts circled in this 1928 baseball magazine from May. There's the National Baseball Association. It was an organization of gentlemen and statesmen who became interested in the game, which has since gained worldwide importance as America's national sport. The amateurs assembled at least once a week for a game. The scorekeeper in the beginning was a bookkeeper or a government statistician, and it required the services of a man skilled in figures, for the tallies generally ran into 3 figures. Crazy. For example, one afternoon's bombardment of 3 and 4 base hits resulted in a score of 211 to 189. The outcome of some of the games was really a matter of endurance, stamina, of unusual parts as displayed by both players and scorer. Crazy stories, and a 1928 baseball magazine article from in the Strange as It Seems archives. And the final few facts here in the folder look like came from the 1950s, in the era of my grandma Elsie Hix, who carried the comic strip from 1948 till really about the mid-1960s, when she handed it over to my father to carry on. But here's a few from the Elsie Hix era. We've got, in the early days of baseball, it was the batter that called the pitch. Crazy. Indicating where he wanted the ball thrown. She featured this again, another period in the 1950s, about how batters were allowed to demand high or low pitched balls according to the official rules of baseball. Crazy. In the early days, I guess the pitcher was allowed also to throw in any fashion, but the batter called the pitch instead, and he would ask for a high ball from waist to shoulders, low, waist to knee, or fair, which meant anywhere from waist to shoulder. And apparently in one game, a pitcher had to throw more than 50 pitches before a strike was called. Crazy fact from early baseball here from the Elsie Hix era. And another crazy early baseball fact from the Elsie Hix era, apparently in the early days of baseball as well. An umpire allowed the players 5 minutes to look for a lost ball. So apparently when before a new one was put into play, the umpire would call time. I guess it's from 1886, rule adopted when the ball is lost. Umpire immediately substitutes a new one, but prior to this year, prior to 1886, the rule provided that if a ball were lost during the course of the game, the umpire was to allow the players 5 minutes to search for it before tossing a new one into play. Crazy. And the last fact from the Elsie Hix era, and the last one in this folder from old baseball, but apparently also under the rules of baseball, going back all the way to 1958, a ball caught on the first bounce constituted an out on the rules first introduced to baseball back in 1958. You were out after the first bounce, strange as it seems. Well, that wraps it up for this week's episode, taken from the folder Old Baseball on the Strange As It Seems archives. If you like stories of the strange and unusual, mined from the Strange As It Seems archives here, 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, hit the bell to subscribe. Like, follow, leave a comment, drop me a line, and we'll see you next week here for another episode of Strange As It Seems.